All right, fourth grade friends. So today we're talking about the Civil War and how Indiana played a role in that. So we know that when Indiana was getting established, there was a lot of disagreement in the country, and that one of the biggest things that we did in our Constitution was we said that we were not going to allow slavery. At the time, a lot of states in the South were. And so we were kind of divided into two portions. And so as people were going west, Indiana and many other states were advocating for abolition, so ending slavery altogether. And they definitely did not want the new areas coming in allowing slavery. However, the people in the South were like, I don't understand. Slavery is awesome because we get people to work for free. So, like, why not? And so in 1820, Congress was like, well, it's fine. We'll just do a Missouri Compromise and we're just going to draw a line right here through Louisiana, through the Louisiana Purchase Territory area. And, north of it, no slavery. South of it, slavery's fine. And that created 12 slave states and 12 free states. I don't understand in what world they thought that was going to be a solution, but they did. And obviously it did not work. So abolitionists, like I said before, did not like slavery, and so they were always looking for ways to help people escape. And so in 1790s, a lot of them started working on the Underground Railroad, and that was like a secret network that helped enslaved people escape and get freedom in the North and in Canada. So information about those were passed through hidden messages that often happened in songs, which is really cool. So between 40,000 and 100,000 people were freed using that system. A lot of those people passed through Indiana to get to freedom. So thousands of people escaped slavery by traveling through Newport, which was a town in western Indiana. And then once African Americans were free, people started getting concerned that they really wouldn't ever receive fair treatment in the United States. And so a lot of them decided that the new plan was just going to be to free these slaves and then move them back to Africa. And so they established Liberia on Africa's west coast, and started this movement that was known as colonization in 1816, and they just were taking people and shipping them to Liberia, and that was during that time. So by 1867, there were about 13,000 freed slaves that were sent there, but a lot of people really didn't like that movement, and so it ended. I also kind of agree with them. I don't really understand why it would be our right to free them and then decide where they go. But anyways, it happened. So then in 1860, Abraham Lincoln becomes president. And at the time he was a part of the Republican Party, which was very against slavery. The Republican Party then is not like how we think of the Republican Party now. Those political parties have changed a lot. So the southern states were arguing for states' rights. So saying that states had the right to make whatever choice they wanted, and that you as a state should be allowed to, do what you wanted. And Lincoln was not very happy about that. And so when the states realized that he wasn't going to just leave them alone, the southern states were like, oh, well, then we're just going to secede. Like, we're just not part of the U.S. anymore. Like, bummer, bye. And so they just started deciding that they were their own separate thing, and they called themselves the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. And there were 11 southern states that made that. So Lincoln didn't accept them seceding. He decided that the Confederate States were still a part of the U.S., and that he was going to do everything he could to keep it together. And so the northern states became the Union. And he used the Union to describe this country he envisioned that had liberty for all and no slavery. So not very long after Lincoln was brought into office, at about 1861, Confederates fired shots at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and these shots really started the Civil War. It was a huge problem, and a civil war is just any war that happens between two groups of people of the same country. So it's our civil war, but not necessarily the only civil war that's ever happened in the world. But those shots started our Civil War. And so both sides had strengths and weaknesses. The Union had a larger population and a lot more factories. So they could get a lot more supplies for the army. But a lot of the battles took place in the South. And so the Confederates had a much better understanding of the land and what was there and how to plan out those battles. The Union also had a lot of railroads for moving troops and supplies, whereas the Confederates really didn't have any. So soon after the first shots were fired, the president called for 75,000 volunteers to fight for the Union. A lot of states were really uncomfortable and wanted to just find a compromise and make everybody happy. But Indiana very quickly decided that they were going to be loyal to the Union. And so the governor at that time was Oliver P. Morton, and he strongly supported President Lincoln. And he told Lincoln that he would have 6,000 soldiers to help defend the Union. But within 2 weeks, he actually had 12,000 Indiana men that volunteered to fight. So Indiana was able to form 6 regiments. A regiment is like a military unit that has like several groups of soldiers in it. So we made 6 regiments, and he chose a couple of lawyers that leaded those troops into battle. So most people thought the war was going to end really quickly, but it did not. It lasted 4 years and went across 23 states. There were as many as 10,000 battles that were fought. The Union soldiers were trying to get to Richmond. They felt that if they could get through Richmond, then they would be able to get to the Confederate capital and capture it quickly and end things. However, even though they thought it was going to be an easy battle, they actually lost that one. It was a huge win for the Confederates, and it was called the First Battle of Bull Run. So that happened July 24th of 1861, just like a year and a few months later. On September 17th in 1862, we had the Battle of Antietam. And it was the bloodiest day of the entire war. The Confederate Army decided to invade the North near Maryland. There were thousands of soldiers on both sides that were killed and wounded during the battle. The Union Army did successfully make the Confederates retreat, so that was a big victory for the North. And Lincoln really used that success at Antietam to make the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. And he did that January 1st, 1863, so about 4 months later. So the document basically promised to free all slaves once they had taken back control of the South. So later in 1863, the Congress passed a law that allowed African Americans to fight in the Union. So thousands of men enlisted. A lot of them wanted to see their brothers and sisters in the South freed, and so a lot of them enlisted the minute that was allowed. It was called the 28th Regiment, which was the United States Colored Troop, which actually was formed in Indiana in November of 1863. So they fought in some of the most important battles, and more than 200 men of that 28th Regiment died in the war. The most significant battle of the war was fought in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and it took 3 days, from July 1st to July 3rd in 1863. So the Union won there. It was this huge thing, and the Union won there, and it really ended the Confederate general's hopes that he could win. So we were then able to really control that area. And then on top of that, the very next day on July 4th, the Union forces captured Vicksburg, Mississippi, which gave them control of the Mississippi River, which was huge. So fighting continued for 2 more years, but because we had control of those 2 main areas, we really started to know that we were going to win this war. And the Confederacy was going to lose. So even though Indiana was a northern state and we believed in freedom for all, there were some Hoosiers that sided with the South. And the governor, Morton, was a little bit worried that they were going to rebel. He also was a little nervous because we butted right up to some southern states, and he was concerned that that there would be southern troops that would try to cross into the north through Indiana. So he created the Indiana Legion, which is a militia group. So a militia group is it's not a military group. It's not necessarily a part of the army, but they're trained like soldiers. And so a militia basically handles the situations that happen at home. So the Indiana Legion fought a huge battle in July 8th of 1863. A Confederate general named John Hunt Morgan decided he was going to lead troops on horseback across the Ohio River and up into Indiana. He wanted to steal horses and supplies, and also kind of hoped to find people in Indiana that agreed and supported the South and, bring them with him. So his actions became known as Morgan's Raid. July 9th, about 450 people from that militia, that Indiana Legion, tried to fight him, but he had 2,400, and we only had 450. And so that was considered the Battle of Corydon. And it was the only Civil War battle that was fought on Indiana soil, and the Union lost. So they Morgan continued moving through Corydon that night, and then on to Salem, and continued to go through the eastern part of the state and into Ohio before he was captured. He did escape from prison, but he was killed in battle in Tennessee in 1864. While all of this fighting is going on, we had a lot of women and children at home that also wanted to help out. And so Governor Morton helped organize some things where women could knit clothes and socks and those kinds of things for the soldiers. A lot of them served as nurses, and they rolled bandages. Some helped make ammunition. Some women even took jobs in the state arsenal. An arsenal is like where the weapons are kept. And they worked to keep the Indiana soldiers supplied with weapons and ammunition. So April 1865, the Confederate Army is hopelessly outnumbered at this point. The Union has definitely taken charge. And on April 9th, the Confederates surrendered to the Union. General Lee and General Grant, the generals from both sides, met in Virginia and officially put an end to the fighting. So when the war ended, the country was suffering. We were very divided. And the cost of the war was huge. About 600,000 Americans died from this fight. Indiana had seen at least action in at least 308 battles. More than 197,000 Hoosiers had fought, and of those, more than 25,000 Hoosier soldiers died. So Lincoln had these great plans for reuniting the nation once all of this was done, and rebuilding the country and bringing everybody back together. But shortly after this happened, he was assassinated. And so the rebuilding really had to happen without him. But he's forever remembered as one of the greatest presidents that we've ever had. And he will forever be known for his role in ending slavery. And also Indiana's governor, Morton, he's also remembered as the Great War Governor for his effort during the Civil War and what he did to really support Lincoln and African American rights. He actually afterwards became a member of the U.S. Senate and continued campaigning and fighting for African American rights. So kind of a cool little piece of Indiana history. I hope that helps answer your questions, and I hope you all have a great day.